Hello and welcome to With the First Link, the podcast that hopes to make our future as bright and as just as the one that we see in Star Trek: The Next Generation. And we think that one way to do that is to recap and discuss the entire series, one episode at a time, doing our best to look at it all through an anti-oppression, pro-diversity, anti-racist lens. I'm Ruthie Samoshi.
And I'm Matthew Simone, and today we'll be talking about conspiracy. This episode was written by Tracy Torme and Robert Sabaroff and directed by Cliff Bole. It first aired on May 7th, 1988.
For today's check-in, let's talk about conspiracies and conspiracy theories.
You know, I heard something, Ruthie.
What did you hear?
I think the world should know about
Okay.
this. I found it on the internet, this secret piece of information that only this YouTuber knows.
Tell me.
And I need to get it out to the world. To the world! You know, I'm so sick of conspiracy theories, to be honest.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I don't know. I just think they're very... Like, I've got... Okay, so in my closet, if you ever look in my closet, it's just stacks of nerdy t-shirts.
Right.
This is probably not a surprise to you. And some of my nerdy t-shirts are like X-Files shirts.
Right.
And they'd say things like, trust no one, and like, the truth is out there. And it was like fun and goofy.
Yeah.
And now it's just gotten like dangerous and scary. And the thoughts of conspiracy theorists and theories are killing people. It's literally people are dying over misinformation.
Yeah.
And it makes me very sad. How do you feel about conspiracies?
I feel like there are some conspiracy theories that are, I don't know, maybe like fun and perhaps relatively harmless, like the idea of like Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster, that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
A friend of mine got me a birthday card recently, and it said believe in yourself even if no one else does, and it had Bigfoot.
Yeah,
on it.
yeah, like that's, but I also feel, I don't know, I think the slippery slope argument can sometimes be like a disingenuous argument, but I do feel like some conspiracy theories are kind of like an opening into more dangerous ones.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Like I remember someone talking about the moon landing and like going through all of this like evidence to say that it was like faked. And this person I don't think this person actually believed that it was fake, but they just liked it as a fun conspiracy theory. And I was like, okay, but like, I feel like that opens up like when you start picking things apart in ways that actually don't make sense, that I feel like that leaves you vulnerable to doing that in more dangerous ways. And it's like, then you're kind of sowing distrust in a way that, okay, but here's my other thing that I feel really conflicted about. The language that conspiracy theorists use is the kind of thing that I think people need to do. You need to think critically about information that is presented to you. You shouldn't just trust something because the government says it's the case. You know?
Don't be a sheeple.
Like, right, but I think that's real, but also don't just trust something because one internet site said it was the case, you know? Right,
yeah, that's not effective or thorough research either.
Yeah.
You're right, because that is a part that I think is frustrating if you're looking at sort of people who have joined these conspiracy theory masses and, you know, ended up in doing things like marching in anti-vaccination protests or storming the Capitol building. There's one element or one aspect where you're like, oh, I wish that you could be allies toward other movements that are challenging power, but challenging power in the correct way.
Yeah.
You know, and challenging the right power. Because right now what's happening instead is that rather than challenging power in a way that, or being critical of power in a way that actually helps society and is working toward justice, it ends up instead making people more vulnerable, less trusting of each other, and eroding democracy further. And you're like, no, like, yes, I get it. You're frustrated with the powers that be. But rather than going like, so let's go critique capitalism, instead they're like, let's go destroy science.
Yeah.
You know, and you're like, wait a second, what? Where did you go left here when you could have gone right? Like, what happened? And so I have to interact with a number of people like this on a fairly regular basis. In one of my workplaces, which is our local honey producer, I think it overlaps with like a health and wellness community.
Yes.
And there are elements of that community that are like anti-vax, anti-science, And we'll have people come by the store and complain about having to wear masks, having to get vaccinated, and thinking that we're going to be immediately on board with them. Like they think that we're like a receptive ear coming in with, and so they're kind of surprised when I'm like, no, like, dude, you should really go get vaccinated.
Right.
And then likewise in my other location where I work at the planetarium and space center here, you do get people that come in and do want to like talk about space related conspiracy theories, like the moon landing conspiracy and stuff like that. But if I can make one generalization toward trying to break down, and this is probably an oversimplification, but I think it's a good place to start, is I think that at their heart, all conspiracies are kind of part of the one grand previous misunderstanding or conspiracy of the universe. And that was that Earth was at the center of the universe. Because I feel like at the heart of all conspiracies essentially is ego. It's that I'm in the know, I know better, and society is either for me or is entirely against me, but ultimately I'm always at the center of the story. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that's where some of the attack on science comes from, is that people feel like science is an attack on their ego structure and like on their identity. Carl Sagan calls it the great demotions of science. You know, at first we were God's special creation at the center of the universe. And then that narrative was replaced by science that said, oh, actually, we're not at the center of the solar system. And, oh, the solar system isn't at the center of the galaxy. And, oh, the galaxy actually isn't at the center of the universe. Right. We're not really at the center of anything. And when you look at things like flat Earth conspiracy, essentially at the heart of that is like, Earth is special. It's this constructed thing for humanity. Or a lot of the dialogue around the vaccines is like, my immune system is good enough. I don't need the vaccination. Right. You know, or that the government is lying to me or wants to track me specifically. And you're like, but why? Like, why? What do you do that the government wants to follow you around like that? So I think that a lot of it, like, I'm always listening for the uncritical part in these conspiracy theories, which is that the conspiracy theorist is somehow the hero. Right. And that's I think something that we need to all be aware of, because there is not really any room for ego in science. At least there's not supposed to be. That's not how it works. It's a collective community of people trying to check each other's ego in order to come to a consensus around truth. Yeah. And I think that's the other part, is that people don't really understand how science works. Yes, that is true. Sorry, that was a long rant, but I've been sitting on this stuff for a while because I have to deal with it like almost every other day. So and it makes me so sad, because again, I think people, like you were saying, that the vocabulary they're using, the sentiment, they could be allies in fighting for actual justice, but instead get so sidelined by all of this nonsense. Yeah. Well, the other thing I was thinking is that, you know, maybe if we lived in a perfect world, science would be this really wonderful field where there is no ego, like you said, but science is produced by humans, and humans are like very fallible, and they bring their own biases and ego to the work that they do. You know? Like, okay, so for example, the medical field, we should be able to trust it, but historically it has been a racist field, it has been a homophobic field, it has been a transphobic field, it has been a fatphobic field, it has been a sexist field. So it's understandable why someone like for example, issues like chronic pain or migraines, things like that tend to affect people who are less privileged or powerful in this society, at least. Those tend to be taken a lot less seriously, or historically have been taken a lot less seriously. So it makes sense that people would look for something else, an alternative kind of medicine. I think like that makes sense. Hopefully those alternatives are still using the scientific method, right? And I think that's where we get into these like problems of the kind of snake oil sort of thing, where it's like, well, sure, because people take advantage of that mistrust in order to then push a product or a narrative or agenda. And it's like, and I agree with what you're saying. I think what's happened is that it's that those blind spots in science are created not by the scientific method itself,
No.
but by the racism
Yes.
or sexism that prevented the diversity of scientists that otherwise would be represented or be able to participate in science.
And so science needs to be opened up, not shunned.
Yes.
And the other thing, and this I want to give credit, an episode of a podcast that I listened to not long ago. The podcast is called Maintenance Phase, and I haven't listened to it's not a podcast I listen to like all the time, so I haven't listened to all the episodes, but I listened to an episode called The Wellness to QAnon Pipeline.
Oh, yes. I've been reading stuff about this.
Yeah, so it's like people who are very involved in like the wellness movement, which is not a scientific movement by any means, but that
No?
sort of ends up as a gateway to becoming a QAnon believer. And
Sure, yeah.
but one of the things they talked about with this issue with, science or medicine often historically having been created or performed by people who were racist, sexist, homophobic, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
So what they were saying was that this whole problem with science, being a racist or sexist institution because of the racism of the people doing the science, like that it's not a conspiracy. It's not like there are all of these doctors meet in a secret room and they're like, here's how we're going to
the science building with their science.
Yeah,
pope
but like here's how we're going to marginalize these people further. That's not how it works. It's not a conspiracy. It's just unchecked bias. And I would say that like a lot of the people who kind of go into these conspiracy theories have that same privilege and that same unchecked bias that scientists have historically had. So it's like no, you actually can trust. Like that's one of the things I remember hearing someone else say, and I think it's fairly accurate. Like one of the ways that we know that the vaccines are probably like quite safe is that rich white Americans were like giving them to themselves first.
Oh yeah, then clamoring to get them, even though at the same time some of those same people might have been online or on the news touting other conspiracy theories.
Right.
Ironically.
But they didn't send them to, marginalized communities first saying like, let's test these out. Yeah. So they're probably pretty safe then. Right. So it's like, like you as a white, straight, cis person, you probably can trust science more than, and medicine more than most people can.
This is an important part, I think, for me as a science communicator and working at a place that does science communication. Talking about the conclusions of science is always easy and exciting. To talk about, the new black hole that was discovered, or the planet that might have water, or other stellar phenomenon that's really exciting. But then if someone is kind of distrusts the process or they're unfamiliar with the process, that is going to spark more suspicion, because there's always the question, well, how do you know that? How do you know?
Yeah. And
so we're trying to focus more on methodology, which is also interesting. Like it's really quite amazing that we've discovered how to find the things that we found or make the things we're making. Like there's huge misunderstanding around the mRNA vaccine and how it works. You're seeing things online about like, genetic engineering, genetic manipulation. You're like, no, it doesn't alter your DNA.
Right.
That's not how it works. Right. And so it's kind of like trying to understand how we know what we know and how we do what we do. And I think when people find that out, I've found that it softens that suspicion, because people are like, oh, okay, now I know how the science works. Now I know how you're so certain of your discovery or your conclusion. Again, and even tiny things like we've said in previous episodes, that distinction between like hypothesis and theory.
Right.
People understanding how theory is arrived at. It's not all the scientists getting together in the science building saying what science is going to be. That's not how it works, right? It's this diffuse group of people that have to check each other's results and methodology. And so it's sort of trying to pull back that curtain a little bit and engaging people. And that's one of the great things, is that at the same time now you have more open access to participating in science through like citizen science. Right. Even something as simple as being able to, like, people can go online now and literally look through telescope data to help discover planets, like on your own. You could do that on the internet. Like that's incredible. And so at the same time, it's sort of sad that although science is probably more participatory now than ever, I think maybe there's a lag time where the past impacts of poorly done science and poorly represented science is kind of catching up to us.
Those things might be related in that if science is more participatory now, people are able to see some of the problems that happened when science was only done by a very privileged few. And so they can, so there, perhaps this distrust, I hope, this is optimism, perhaps this distrust of science will lead to a further trust, but we have to go through this distrust while people see like, oh, these scientists were not all-knowing beings, you know?
Yes, but it comes back again to that, like, where do you proceed from?
Right.
If it's still coming from like a place of ego and the ego of that individual, well, I can do science better than scientists, then no, it's not going to get any better. But if it comes from that place of like wonder and discovery and at the risk of learning that you're still not like a special creature at the center of the universe, then I think it's fine. But it depends on what the motivations are. And that isn't to say that life isn't like important and wonderful and awesome.
Yeah.
You know, I try to make that distinction as well in the planetarium. Like, yeah, we're not at the center of the universe, but it doesn't mean that life isn't amazing. It doesn't mean that you're still not this being that's inherently still connected to like the fabric of space and time over billions of years of evolution.
Yeah. And I think that one thing that makes me a little bit hopeful about this is that it's something that I've seen in teaching, and like certainly with little kids, when they start to learn something new, they can sometimes act like it from the outside. It can look like they're unlearning things. So like they're not able to count, for example. Like I remember this happened with a cousin of mine who was really, really little. I think they were like 3 or 4, and they were really good at counting, and then they stopped being able to count as well, or like they would only count on certain fingers, and it was kind of like, what is, like all of the adults were like, that's so weird, like you used to be able to count, now you can't. But then like a couple minutes later, I think the kids started figuring out addition and started being like, okay, so 2 and 1, that makes 3. And so it was like it looked like there was a block in this thing that they had been able to do. And I've also seen it even with older kids, where it's like when you start to learn something new, that can be really uncomfortable because it makes you kind of question everything you knew before. And so that can be sort of like, no, I don't want to learn this new thing. But once you're able to get past that discomfort, your mind can be a lot more open. So hopefully these people who are coming at it, because I 100% think you're right that a lot of it has to do with that idea of like, what do you mean, me personally, I am not at the center of the universe? Yeah. But hopefully we're going through maybe societally that discomfort phase, and then we can end up on the other side of it. I hope. I don't know if that's going to happen.
What I love about science is that whether it's through biology or cosmology or it always reaffirms our interconnectedness to one another, like to the ecology, the environment, to society. And I think there's that tension here that we're seeing now, especially around things like vaccine resistance. It's like, people are spinning it where it's like, oh, this is your way of now forcing me out of society. Yeah. And they're like, no, this is our way of ensuring that society continues.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's like, no. But it's like turning the story around and making it about themselves. Right. You know,
that's actually, that you kind of blew my mind a little bit with that idea that it all comes down to the original. I don't even know if it's the original conspiracy, but like the original misunderstanding of how the universe works, which is that we're at the center of it.
Well, if that narrative holds true, then who's in the cradle of power?
Yeah.
And I think now, again, part of my background here is I'm an ex-evangelical, right? So I was a part of that. I was tied into that community rut. So I'm trying to draw from those experiences to form this idea. But I think right now is like the church is used to being in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
For a lot of like major decisions. And so in my opinion, this might be its own conspiracy theory. I don't think so. But like what we see happening in British Columbia right now is like there were protests outside of hospitals. Like people were blocking
Yeah.
ambulances being able to get into hospitals over vaccine records and stuff like that. And it was awful, awful, awful. But also you saw Texas basically overthrow Roe v. Wade
Yes.
a few weeks ago. And I don't think those two things are dissimilar from each other, or they're interconnected, because here's what I think. Like the church has been so used to being able to say, here's who you can get, here's who you can marry, here's who you can. I see church in a broad sense, not all churches, but I like from religious tone. Who you can marry, here's how you have to plan your family, here's who gets to belong and who doesn't belong. Mm-hmm. And everyone's like, yeah, like you have that influence. And especially in the United States, that influence is very strong. But then all of a sudden, something happens, a global pandemic, and we're like, okay, wait a second. We really need to put science in the driver's seat right now. It has to be making the societal choices and decisions in the moment, because that's what's going to keep us alive. And I think some people were just really not cool with that. And in some ways, this might be us trying to swing back the pendulum of power in the other direction. Science can't tell us what to do. We're going to jump back into faith. Yeah. And this is what faith says we need to do. And let's grasp power and make a charge back and forward. And I think some people are just feeling like their privileged state of power and authority is being really challenged right now by science coming into the driver's seat and saying, no, we got to put science in charge right now in order for us to survive.
Yeah. And I would say that whole thing that you just said, you started off a little bit saying maybe this is its own conspiracy theory, but I think what makes that different from a conspiracy theory is that you're not claiming that this is all part of some grand plan. This is people grasping at what they can, and several people are grasping at a similar thing, and they're grabbing on to, whatever they can get like a foothold in. And this is in this episode, that episode of Maintenance Phase, where they talk about like QAnon. It's not like an organized movement in the same. It's got all these different sort of groups of people that are kind of latching on to the same thing, but they're not all being pushed by like a unified force. So to me, that's not a conspiracy theory, because you're coming up with what might be an explanation as to why these people are acting this way, but you're not like, these people are like what QAnon says, which is like, and then there are these codes and you can like determine that they're all connected. Like to me, what you said is different from a conspiracy theory for that reason. It's an idea, but it's a hypothesis, but not a conspiracy.
Yeah. And this is one of the powers of science, and I try to explain this to people who think that it is a weakness. It's like, well, scientists are always changing their minds. Like they're learning something and then they change their minds. And I'm like, that is a good thing. That's a good thing, because it means that there is a comfort and an embracing of discomfort. In this case, the discomfort of saying, I don't actually know. Because and I think this is another result of privilege in a way. And we were seeing this. I'm thinking back to a sign that I saw during Black Lives Matters protests in Vancouver. And someone was walking around with a sign that said, deprioritize white comfort.
Yes.
Right? And I think what happens is that when you're in a privileged place of society, you can conflate discomfort with unsafety.
Yeah.
And those two things are not the same. And if you're in a really privileged state, you can conflate discomfort with evil. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what happens. It's like, okay, well, I feel uncomfortable with the ways the world is working. There's something scary going on. And if you add like sort of a religious twist to that, they're like, this must be spiritual warfare. Yeah. Or this is the devil. Or this is where it's like, no, you could just deal with like a healthy dose of like understanding structures and institutions and injustice. There's not some spooky people meeting in a room, like eating children, like QAnon was saying. And they're like, yeah, but the elites are doing this and the elites are doing that. And I'm like, yeah, elites do have power. That is true. And that the wielding of that power is unjust. But it's routed in what's plainly visible in the injustices of the world. It's not going on behind a building or inside of a building or in a basement or anything like that. It's like clearly obvious, and it's within the structures of capitalism.
Yeah.
But I think we're always told capitalism's supposed to be good, so it must be something else that's happening. But people can sense something's wrong.
And I think part of the appeal is that there's something hidden.
And I know about it.
Right. Elites have all of this power. We can see that, but that's not the interesting one. The power imbalances that we can see are not nearly as I guess like intriguing to explore than the ones that are hidden from us.
Because they've been normalized.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when something is made
Yeah.
plain, it's not as fun, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and you can't, and there is a fun component to it as well, because similar in the vein you're talking about, I read a fascinating article. I should find it. Maybe put it in the link. But it was how someone saw the gamification of QAnon.
Right.
It was like when the Q drops come and then people get to go down these rabbit holes and everything. They're like, it's written like an RPG. And you get to be the protagonist in that RPG, finding the clues, getting that dopamine hit when you're like, oh, I found a connection between things, like, everything else. It's fun to get wrapped up in that narrative and feel like you're making discoveries and that you're smart and learning stuff. And in the end, you've just been fed all these breadcrumbs down a rabbit hole.
And again, you're at the center of it.
And you're at the center of it, right? That it speaks to you as a protagonist. You all get to be a protagonist, right? But
well, that was a half-hour check-in.
Whoa, that's okay. Because I talked about this episode like 6 months ago, and I was like, oh, leading up to conspiracy, Ruthie, I'm going to have things to say about this. Yeah. So thank you for the catharsis.
No, there's a lot. I mean, the conspiracy in this one is a little different.
It is, however, they, as we'll see, before they just jump into stuff, they're all like, okay, let's find actual evidence and let's get the one unbiased person who has no ego at all to do the research.
Yeah, it's true. If only we all had one unbiased friend who could give us some objective truth.
Are you saying, Ruthie, that what we really need is to trust data?
Oh my gosh. That is what I'm saying.
Boom.
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 All right, Matt, what's this episode about?
All right, so in this episode, Picard attends a secret meeting with an old friend and some of Starfleet's finest captains. He starts off skeptical of any possible conspiracies, but soon finds himself embroiled in one. So we open with Commander Riker making a mission log. The ship is on its way to the ocean world of Pacifica for a scientific mission.
That made me laugh. I love it when the worlds are named like Pacifica. Let's name it after one of our oceans.
Yeah, I bet if people live there, they're like, why are we naming it after your oceans? This is our planet.
Yeah, I'm curious is Earth not an ocean world? Like, we're mostly water. We're mostly ocean.
You know what? I had a sharp-witted, smart young person asked me that question just yesterday in the planetarium.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about ocean planets and worlds, and they asked that very question. They're like, wouldn't we count as an ocean planet? Like, so much of our surface is covered in ocean. Yeah,
because I'm sure Pacifica must have some land. I don't know.
Unless it's just a ball of water.
Just water, nothing else.
That could be possible. That could happen.
Just water. It's a big water droplet floating through space. Droplet. LaForge is telling Data a joke. We only hear the punchline, which is like, and she says, "Try that in hyperspace." And Data fully understands the joke. He explains it. He explains why it's funny. He agrees that it's funny. But I guess it's not really satisfying when someone explains to you why your joke is funny but doesn't laugh at it. So it's not as satisfying for LaForge. And Data tries to laugh. For the audience, though, that's even funnier than the joke. Yeah, no, we get to see Data try to understand humor. Yeah, and we see a nice little moment between Riker and Troy because they also find it amusing. And then Riker tells LaForge to speed up a bit so they can get to Pacifica early because they're going there for a science mission, but they're all excited to go swimming. And Troy has to explain to Data because Data's like, oh, you can swim in the holodeck, and Troy's like, yeah, but that's not the same. And then we get another instance of Data not understanding idioms, I guess, because he's confused by the term moonlight swim. He's like, you can swim in moonlight? And then Worf doesn't like swimming because it's too much like bathing. And I thought that was hilarious. Yeah. Too much like bathing. Who likes, it's just like taking a big bath. That's not fun. Yeah, I guess Worf isn't into bathing. Data tells Riker that he's receiving a Code 47 message. And they're like, Code 47? And that's for Captain's eyes only. So Riker wakes up Picard. I was always wondering, how are they on opposite duty shifts? You never see that happen, but apparently they are. And so Picard's asleep. Can you imagine being woken up by a video call? Yeah, that seems a bit intrusive. And that happens a lot in Star Trek. Yeah, where someone just automatically, even in Zoom, you get to select if someone's going to start a call on video or not. Off. Yeah, it's just like Riker's face over Picard's bed. And you can only imagine that, can everyone on the bridge see Picard in his pajamas? with his open chest. Like,
yeah, because when he's talking to him, Riker looks like from the perspective of still sitting in the captain's chair. So are they all just looking at Picard in bed on the view screen? I hadn't thought of that.
Not fun. Not for me, at least.
No, there's a message for Picard. It's from an old friend of his. We don't know this old friend, but we're introduced to them now, named Walker. And Walker says that he's like very, like he's almost like in a panic, this Walker character. He's like wide-eyed, and he's talking about how there is a risk that something is wrong at the heart of Starfleet. And something was kind of hinted about this with Gregory Quinn, an admiral that we saw come aboard. We had a previous episode a few months ago that we had talked about where the captain and the crew were being like interrogated, that there was something wrong, and now this is sort of the sequel to that episode. So Walker won't tell Picard what's up, but he wants to meet at Ditalics B immediately, and the Pacific can wait. And he tells Picard, like my one t-shirt said I mentioned earlier, trust no one.
Yeah, don't tell anyone about this. So we get the intro. Mm-hmm. And then on the bridge, Picard tells them we're going to Ditalics B, and he says don't tell anything to Pacifica. Hopefully this won't take very long, and don't say anything to anyone off the ship about this diversion without me approving it. So we learned that Ditalics B was a mining planet owned by the Ditalics Mining Corporation. That feels so dystopian, of like a corporation owning a planet.
A space mining company. Yeah, it's like the first time that we ever get a hint that there are any private owned anything. I don't know if this is part of the Federation though. It may not be.
Yeah, it's weird, but it's sort of, the mines are not being used anymore. And it's one of those planets where like its orbit and its rotation are in sync, so one side always faces the sun. So you've got like a cold side and a hot side, and the mines are like in that sliver in the middle where it's temperate, I guess. There are no miners there, no indigenous life, and this is a good episode for Data, I think, because he's got a lot of, there's a growth. So he like he's like, it's a lifeless hunk of rock, a useless ball of mud, a worthless chunk, and then Riker's like, no, I understand. Thank you. Done.
Yeah, got it, Data. Thank you. They arrive at Ditalics B, and there's 3 starships already in orbit. And one of them is Walker Keel's ship, which is the USS Horatio. The others are the Renegade and the Thomas Paine. And the ships are not answering Worf's hails. And so Picard's like, okay, stop trying to communicate, because obviously everyone's trying to be like radio silent and secretive. And there are 3 life forms on the planet near the entrance to a mining tunnel. So Picard like turns around and he's like, I'm going to beam down to those coordinates. And Riker's like, by yourself? And he's like, by myself, number 1. Yeah. And the door's just closed, and he like heads to the transporter.
And Riker like can tell now is not the time to argue about this.
Yeah, there's something. Yeah. Picard materializes on the planet, and it's just like this desolate red, like volcanic wasteland, essentially.
Yeah. So he walks into this mining tunnel, and you can see everything's in kind of like disrepair. It clearly has not been used. And then 3 Starfleet captains show up. 2 of them actually aim their phasers at Picard. And then the third is Walker. And Walker starts testing Picard. So he asks where they met. And then he says, do you remember introducing Jack Crusher to Beverly? And Picard is like, I didn't introduce them, you did. And Walker says, my brother introduced them. And Picard's like, you don't have any brothers, you have 2 sisters. What is going on?
Yeah, so weird.
Yeah, and then it was clearly a test to make sure he was him. And then Walker Keel is his full name, but he introduces Captain Rix, who is a Bolian, I believe. We haven't met a Bolian before, but he's not a human. And then Captain Tryla Scott, who was apparently the fastest person ever to make captain in Starfleet history. So good for
I guess
her.
Even faster than Kirk, because Kirk was that person like 100 years ago or whatever.
100 years ago, and she beat him. There you go.
She beat him.
Yeah.
So they've started to notice weird patterns happening in Starfleet Command, unusual orders, unexplained evacuations, and then also mysterious deaths. And that kind of gets Picard's attention. He's like, well, what deaths? And they mention a few people that have all died mysteriously. And he's like, okay.
And he didn't even know that they were all dead.
They didn't know. So they're worried that, of course, the Enterprise is powerful ship within Starfleet. It represents the power of the Federation, and so that they're worried that the Enterprise is going to be targeted and that people are being changed, that they can't remember things, which is why Walker was asking Picard all of these questions, and that's the key. You have to see whether or not they remember anything.
Yeah.
And that his own first officer and medical officer have been acting differently since their last trip to Earth.
Yeah, and so that it's like the medical officer, I think, is important. This comes up later, that if the medical officer is changed, then you can't ask for the medical officer's opinion on if other people have been changed.
Yeah, if there's something biological going on, then that might be the person to get. If you're going to get someone. Yeah. So Picard doesn't believe any of this. Like, he's skeptical, which is good. And he says, okay, well, he's going to stay alert and stay in touch. And, Walker tells Picard, don't talk to anyone about the fact that we've met like this. Yeah. And then Rick's ominously says,
watch your back, Picard.
Watch your back, Picard. It doesn't sound very friendly. It's not like, don't worry, we've got your back. It's just like, watch your back.
Well, it was also weird because, like, Picard was walking away from them with his back to them when Rick said watch that. Your back. So it was like, I half expected Rick's to, like, shoot him in the back right then.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's still kind of creepy, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Picard comes back to the Enterprise and he meets in the ready room with Troy and debriefs with her, like, what's going on. And this is cool because Troy helps him, like, parse out all the feelings that he's having because he wants to check his own biases, especially about the fact that he trusts Walker, like, implicitly. Like, him and Jack Crusher and Picard, it was like their triad. They were inseparable. Yeah. And so he's finding it difficult to digest all this information.
Yeah, and Troy actually, she is very skeptical. She's like, they've effectively disobeyed Starfleet regulations. They used a secure channel to contact you and to keep this from Starfleet and took you off of your mission. Like, don't you think you should at least tell the rest of the crew? And Picard doesn't want to, and he says he doesn't want to implicate them until he has some solid evidence that something is wrong.
Yeah, so he has to protect them as well. Yeah. Right. So, and I mean, like, think about how the distrust would ripple through the whole ship. Like, if you start talking to them and say, like, oh, Starfleet might be compromised, or, Starfleet Command might be compromised, like that information needs to stay with key people who can actually make decisions about it.
Yes. And I think that's a totally good example of the irresponsibility of spreading conspiracy theories among people who are vulnerable to them.
Yeah, and disinformation, because you might want to say, hey, I have this important thing, I get to talk about it, but it's like, okay, that could be damaging, especially in that command structure.
Yes.
So Picard orders the ship back to Pacifica, but then he's like, okay, let's get someone whose ego and bias won't affect their research. Yeah. And this is the other important part of this, a person who has access to all the requisite research that they need to be able to do. Yes. So that's the other important thing. They can have all the pieces to form a coherent story. Yes. And that person is Data. So they get Data to analyze all Starfleet command orders to starships and starbases and colonies for the last 6 months. We're probably talking about thousands and thousands of communications.
Yes. And this is actually one of the reasons why it can be so difficult to, like, when people are like, I did my own research. It's like, no, you didn't. You looked things up. But there is so much information in the world. No human can do what Data is doing right now. In the real world, we are not capable of doing that exact work, which makes us more vulnerable to conspiracy theories.
Yeah, and which is why we have to do it collectively. That's why, science is a body of people. I don't know if you noticed in, like, the random, because whenever they have Data, like, study stuff, they just put, like, random images that flash in front of them, like, really fast. Yeah. And one of the first pictures that comes up is, like, an owl. And I was like, why? I was like, what does it have to do with anything? I was like, why? So I was thinking the whole rest of the time, I was like, why is there a random owl? Is that just, like, he's going through all the communications? So it's like two friends were like, hey, like, look at this owl picture. Ooh. And he's got to, like, go through that as well. I don't know.
Maybe. So Crusher enters the bridge and she asks Picard if he saw Keel, and Picard lies. Picard says, no, we weren't able to see him.
And she's like, kind of weirded out by that. She's like, oh, okay. Yeah. Like, we did meet up with the Horatio. Like, what's going on?
Yeah. But it does kind of, again, like, reinforce the friendship, because Picard was, like, best friends with Jack Crusher, we know. So he was also best friends with Walter Keel. And so she was also a part of that.
Yep. But then, like, right there, Worf picks up a disturbance nearby. And so they go and investigate. They find this giant debris cloud. Yeah. And they're scanning it. And then Worf is like, I'm sorry, sir. It's the Horatio. And you're like, oh, wow, okay, they were just with them and it's destroyed.
Yeah. He calls it flotsam.
That's such a good word.
Yeah, I like it. And yeah, Picard and Crusher are shocked. You know, their friend has just died. And Picard then, it is interesting, he called, in his log, it says, like, I have now decided to tell my executive officer what the meeting was about. And at first I thought he was telling the whole bridge crew, like executive officers, but no, he was just referring to Riker. But he rarely refers to him as his XO. It's usually as his first officer.
They talk about what the meeting in Ditalics B was about, and he reminds Riker that Quinn, who, you know, they were not fans of when he showed up on the ship and was turning things up down earlier, warned him about subversion within the Federation. And then Walker also tried, and now he's dead. So I think Picard now is like, okay, something might be going on.
There's something happening, not sure what exactly, not going to jump to any conclusions. Riker's skeptical. Riker thinks it's quite possible that that there was an accident. But then Data, we cut to Data, and he is doing his scanning of the records, and he notices something intriguing, and then he starts talking to himself. And it's, again, another funny scene where then he explains to the computer what it means to talk to oneself. Because he's excited about it, because it's not a thing that androids usually do, or not a thing that he usually does. And the computer's like, no, I understand. No worries.
Yeah, even the computer's like, yes, Data, I get it. I like this scene because it's showing, like, it's a computer interacting with a computer.
Yeah.
But one of them has, like, a distinct personality, and they show that. Like, it's actually, the computer's even a little bit cheeky there itself. But, you know, it's showing the Data is himself a person, not just a bank of information. And I think that was important because he's not just taking all that information, that data that he's looking at, and dumping it into his brain. He's looking at it objectively to come to a conclusion, something that an ordinary computer can't do.
Yeah, he's analyzing it.
He's analyzing it. So he walks in on Riker and Picard having this discussion, and Picard thinks that the ratio was intentionally sabotaged, and Riker says that he can't be certain. And I think that's good of Riker to say that. Like, absolutely. We still need to be skeptical. But Data says that maybe he can be certain because he's found a strange pattern of personnel being shuffled around on certain ships and on star bases, but done covertly. And he uses a metaphor as like, it's like the left hand of Starfleet didn't know what the right hand is doing. But he believes that there might be an attempt to control vital sectors of Federation territory. And he actually overlays that information of the sum total of all these orders and how they seem to be changing where personnel are located.
It's the sort of thing that I think, and I mean, we see this happening, like you mentioned, Texas, and it's the sort of thing that happens I think quite frequently, where there are all of these little actions that each of them on their own isn't suspicious, but when you put them all together, you can see a larger pattern. And I mean, to go back to like conspiracy theories, I think that this can be an organized attempt, or it can also just be like, oh, they're not like random coincidences, but like all of these people who have similar goals are doing these things, and as they do these little things all over, say, a country or a federation, they do these little things, it can add up to something very dangerous.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and looking at what happened in Texas, like that didn't just happen by accident.
No.
There's a lot of planning and organization that needs to go to overturning a past law like that.
And also like changing public perception, pushing like I think we talked about this like months and months ago, like pushing the Overton window just a little bit to what people think of as reasonable.
Until something dramatic happens that if you look back on time would have been outlandish, like, no, that will never happen. That's never going to happen.
No.
And then slowly but surely it's
Yeah. So they decide to go to Starfleet headquarters, so to fly to Earth. They're going to figure out what's going on.
They're greeted by Admiral Savar, who is Vulcan, I believe. Admiral Aaron, and then, of course, Admiral Quinn. So it's a whole bunch of just like old white dudes that run Starfleet, I guess.
Yeah. And they're like vaguely British, not quite British, but almost British, like upper crust accents.
Kind of colonial tone going on there a little bit. But Riker wants to discuss the reason that they're there in person, because they're like, it's unusual for the flagship to return to Earth. Like, this is just kind of strange. Yeah. Especially because Picard had mentioned earlier, one of the reasons that they were kind of unaware of what was going on. Mm-hmm. Picard said that the Enterprise has been out of like the outer rim. Yeah. I presume of the Federation itself. Yeah. Maybe that was intentional. Maybe they wanted them like way off there so they didn't know what was going on. So So it's unusual now that being so far out, they've come back to Earth.
Yeah. So, but Picard doesn't want to discuss it over, from the ship. He wants to discuss it in person, and they seem a little. The admirals all seem a little like not sure, and then Remick. Commander Remick from that episode, the guy who was doing all of that investigation, he shows up and whispers in Savar's ear, and then they put Picard on hold. And so, the bridge crew kind of discuss what's going on. Troy says that she can tell someone is hiding something, but not who or what, which kind of makes sense with what we learn later with that they're all being controlled, that like she can't pinpoint one of the people. And Worf is also like, I don't like it. I don't trust it.
Yeah. And so the admirals take them off hold and they invite Picard and Riker down. They're like, come eat with us.
Yeah. But then Quinn says he's not going to be able to join them. And it's a little fun. He's like, I won't be able to join you for dinner, but I do want to see the ship. But the thing that's going to keep him from joining dinner is that he is going to be on the ship.
Yeah.
Like he's like, I'm sorry, I can't make it. I'm too busy walking around your ship.
And then Picard thinks that means that he is on their side, which I thought was kind of a poor judgment call on that one.
I believed it. I haven't seen this episode in a long time, and I was like, oh no, that makes sense that Quinn wants to see them alone.
Yeah, it's separately to say, yeah.
But it ends up not being true.
No, and so and we see that immediately afterwards, because before beaming up, Quinn has like this little thin engineering case, and when he opens it up, there is inside like this pink
a crustacean.
Yeah, it's a crustacean. It's like this little, it's basically like a mini lobster looking. Actually, you know what? It's a funny thing. Just yesterday, I also did a rewatch of Wrath of Khan.
Okay.
Which I hadn't seen in like 4 years.
Yeah.
It looks a lot like the SETI eel in Wrath of Khan.
Oh,
like that little thing with like a pincer mouth and whatever. I think though it might be CG, or there's like versions of it in this episode that's 100%. CG and some that aren't, and it doesn't look super great. It's kind of funny actually.
No.
If they wanted that to look menacing and scary, it doesn't. It's like a pink little crab thing. It's like you're like, oh.
Yeah, almost like a kind of lilac colored. I was watching it before. Like I have this thing on my computer where when I after a certain time of day, the blue light kind of decreases, so it's more of a red cast. So when on one rewatch, I saw it. It was kind of orangey, and then I was looking at it again today. I was like, oh, it's like a really nice lilac color. But yeah, he just opens the box and then closes it, and then Remick enters and asks if he's ready to beam up, and it like zooms in on him menacingly.
Yeah, he had to look menacing. I was about to say, yeah. And we don't, it looked like Quinn shut the case quickly before Remick walked in. So we don't know at this point if Remick is in the know or not, because he's just everyone's lackey, right? So we don't know if he actually knows anything.
Yeah.
Back on the Enterprise, Picard says that Quinn seems much better than the last time they saw each other, because Quinn was like really worried about something going on in the Federation.
And now he is like very like full of vitality and excitement. Like we talked a couple weeks ago about toxic positivity, and I feel like we're seeing some of that there. He's like, oh, I'm great. Everything's wonderful. Yeah. I'm so happy. I used to be so sad, but now I'm wonderful.
Picard reminds Quinn that he's like, well, last time we were here, you were talking about this like threat to the fabric of the Federation. And Quinn's like, oh, you took me way too literally. I was only talking about problems in assimilating new races into the Federation. And Picard's like, okay, sure. Just kind of like nods it off.
Yeah.
But clearly that's not what Quinn meant last time they were hanging out together. So Quinn kind of goes towards his quarters.
Yeah.
And Picard kind of gestures to Riker to hold up. And he's like, listen, stay on the ship, help Quinn with anything, then come down to Earth for dinner. But like, that's not Quinn. That's not Quinn. There's something going on here.
Yeah. There's a really funny scene where he's like, get Crusher to figure out a way to give him like a full physical. And Riker's, they kind of argue. Riker's like, how? And he's like, I don't know. Think of something. And Riker's like, he's an admiral.
Yeah, it's like, how am I going to come up with a reason to do this?
Yeah,
like, I don't know, figure it out.
Picard is like, listen, you're the first officer. I'm the captain. I'm ordering you to find a reason.
Yeah.
I love when Riker gets exasperated with Picard.
Riker wonders about Picard beaming down as well, because he's like, you're unarmed and stuff. You can't beam into Starfleet headquarters with a phaser.
Yeah.
So, Picard says he will take care.
I'll take care. Who knows how, but he will do it. So he beams down, and Savar and Aaron and Remick all greet him. And I thought it was nice, like, Savar and Picard. Like, Picard gives Savar the live long and prosper hand gesture because Savar is a Vulcan.
Yes.
And Remick kind of alludes to the last time they met, it was under not great circumstances.
Yeah, no, it was not good.
Do you think Remick is acting differently here? Or do you think not?
Yeah, he seems way too chill.
Yeah.
Because Remick was super wound up before.
Yeah.
And so he just seems like unusually kind of robotic and calm.
In a calm way, yeah. So, and then on the ship, Riker checks in on Quinn in his quarters and says, "You ready for your tour of the ship?" And Quinn's like, "Yeah, but first I want to show you this superior life form." And Riker's kind of confused about this idea of superior, because I think people don't, like in Starfleet, people don't usually talk about some life forms as superior to others.
Yeah.
So Riker's like, maybe I'll get my science officer to look at it. But the science officer is Data. And Quinn says, no, this life form won't like your science officer. And then grabs Riker and throws him. But Quinn is an old man. Let's just say that.
And Riker's got this like look of shock on his face because as soon as he grabs his arm, like Riker's like, "Wow, that's a really strong grip," and he's like, "Vitamins does wonders" or whatever. And then basically just tosses him around,
throws him across the room, and then like, can we say crap and keep our? Do we need explicit for crap?
I think you can say crap.
Yeah, he beats the crap out of Riker. Like, really just, like, throws him around, punches him. Riker manages to call for security. And he does, like, this jump kick and gets Quinn right in the face. And Quinn is totally unfazed.
It's like nothing. Doesn't even matter.
Yeah, he eventually...
Unfaced? No.
No, he's still faced. His face is still there.
Yeah, his face is still there.
Yeah.
And then he knocks Riker out by throwing him into a glass table, which... Okay, fine, whatever.
You know,
anyways.
Riker's taking quite a beating here.
He's taking a beating here.
Yeah, so then on Earth, they drink some Andonian tea while they wait for Riker, and they toast the Horatio. They say it's such a tragedy. And Picard is like, "Oh, yeah, speaking of the Horatio," and he's like super suspicious. He's like, anyone know why that ship like was destroyed? And they say it was an implosion due to the extreme negligence of the captain.
Which I think is just a total dig at Picard.
Yeah, like now they're insulting his friend.
They're just like, well, we don't like your friend and we killed him. We killed your friend. Basically, that's what they're saying.
Yeah, your friend was a bad captain. And like, so Picard is like super suspicious now.
Mm-hmm. LaForge and Worf are running to Quinn's quarters. I guess that constitutes security?
Yeah, now that we don't have Yar in charge of security, we just got LaForge.
Worf's like, "Oh yeah, I guess we didn't train any new security people and no one's on duty right now, so just grab LaForge."
I think they were out of yellow uniforms. They were like, "We don't have a security team right now because we're out of yellow. We only want red in this episode."
Quinn tells them that Riker slipped and hit his head, and they're like, "Okay."
Yeah.
So they call Crusher. And then Quinn wants to leave, and LaForge is like, "Oh, I think you should wait till the doctor shows up." So Quinn just grabs LaForge and throws him right through the door of the quarters. And he, like, lands in the hallway.
It's wild. And then he does something that bugs me. This happens every so often on Star Trek. I hate it when they refer to people by their species. I don't like it.
Right. Well, he's not... I mean, this is... I guess this is him being an alien, an evil alien.
Yes, but
but you're right.
Yeah, it's just racist. Space racist. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's like, "Now Klingon, it's between you and me," and not cool. But then he beats Worf up too, and like Worf is very strong, and he's like really like getting him until he gets shot because Crusher showed up because they called her. LaForge called her, so Crusher shoots him several times with a phaser. It takes a lot to get him to go down.
I thought it was a funny move because Crusher shows up and. I imagine that in her head, she's like, "Why are all these men just punching this guy in the face? Well, I'm just going to shoot him." So she just like shoots him.
Why do these people think their fists are going to work?
Yeah, just shoot the guy. Like, thankfully, she came armed. I don't know if that's normal for a doctor either. Maybe because she knew there'd been a prior security call, so that might be procedure to be armed.
Maybe,
but
yeah. But she has to shoot him several times before he goes down.
They switch to like the sick bay.
Yeah,
and she does a retinal scan on Quinn to confirm whether or not it's actually Quinn. And it is. So that's even more confusing because that would have made things easier to be like, okay, what's a copy or a clone or something?
No, it is him.
It is him. And then she's examining him and notices there's this weird tendril protruding from the back of his neck, and it's all like twisting around and gross and stuff.
Yeah, it's really unpleasant. And Riker is also unconscious in sickbay at the moment.
Right. Yes.
So they're both unconscious, but Quinn is like under one of those examining things that's also a bit of a restraint, I think. And then on Earth, Admiral Aaron says to Picard, "What do you know about conspiracies?" And he says something which I think is actually this actually connects to what we were talking about before, that he says when machinations are real, no one talks about them, and when people suspect them, they generally aren't real.
That's such good wisdom.
It's true. And even sometimes these machinations are not actual conspiracies, but just like problems. Sometimes they are not real and in plain sight, but not talked about as much.
Yes.
Like, for example, again, going back to Texas, like how many women, how many racialized people, how many people who are like tend to be marginalized have been warning for years that Roe v. Wade is going to be overturned, but they weren't taken seriously by people in power or by people who actually have the privilege and the power to do something about it. And then it was.
Or how often have we been talking about, like, we shouldn't have a billionaire class.
Right.
Because they have too much power. And then people come forward and they're like, billionaires are bad. They might be putting microchips in your bodies. And you're like, no, that's not what it is. It's just that this is like an extreme power injustice. And we've been saying it forever.
But when it's real, people don't get as much attention as when they're fake. Because like we talked about, like the fake ones are more fun.
They're more fun. Yeah, it's more fun to think that there's lizard people trying to take over the government.
Exactly.
Remick calls them for dinner, and Picard wants to contact Riker first, and Crusher tells Picard what happens and says that there's a parasitic being, and we see a screenshot of it like inside of Quinn's neck, and we can see the crustacean image of it like in his neck, and its tail is protruding out of his neck, and that's how it breathes, I suppose, while it's inside his body. Because even though it's a crustacean, it needs to breathe air or whatever, so that's fine. And Crusher thinks that the parasite stimulates adrenal glands, what makes them strong. I still don't think that would let you take a kick to the face, but
I don't know. But Picard is like, I don't need the science. I don't need the details right now. Just tell me, like, what can we take it out?
Yeah, she's totally nerding out about this right now.
She's like, it's really cool, actually.
yeah. She's like, no, but I need the tactical advice at the moment. What do I do?
Unfortunately, she doesn't think she can remove it without killing the person.
Right. And Crusher tells Picard that, like, because she knows she just did this experiment herself.
Yeah.
The phaser set to stun won't work. It has to be set to kill.
And he's like, well, it was almost like a Boromir, Lord of the Rings. Like, one does not simply beam down to Starfleet headquarters with a phaser. But
yeah, because that would be super suspicious.
Yeah, basically, he's like, you don't beam down to Starfleet headquarters armed. Like, that's not.
Yeah.
So she's just like, okay, well, try not to get hurt, I guess.
Yeah.
So and then we get this
Riker,
really creepy.
Yeah, because we don't know what happened to the other creature yet, do we?
No.
The other crustacean that was in the case. We don't know.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, Riker just kind of like grabs Crusher by the shoulder, and then it cuts away to Picard entering dinner. So you're like, oh, what? Maybe Riker is infected. We don't know.
Something. I mean, if he's not, that's weird to just come up behind someone and tap them on the shoulder and not be like, hey, Crusher.
Yeah, to be like, hey, I'm awake now.
Yeah.
And just like walk quietly across
bit of
the room.
I mean, this is definitely early Trek where it's like, and it happens, I don't know, I've seen it on a variety of shows where it's like, they want to make the audience a little suspicious of one character, so they make that character do something so uncharacteristically creepy.
Suspicious.
Yeah.
It's it's like Among Us, the video game, but in this form.
Super.
So Picard enters dinner. I like your note here about this, that it's COVID-friendly seating.
They're all sitting so far away from each other. They all have their own table.
They'll have their own little table. And so this is when, like, if you had any doubt that something weird is going on, I guess this is the point too, because they open the container and it's a whole bunch of mealworms. And I remember, like, as a kid watching this episode, and I couldn't figure out, I'm like, is that supposed to be weird? Or like in the Federation, we're just cool eating all kinds of food from different cultures and societies.
Yeah.
So maybe they're like, we just wanted to eat mealworms today. Maybe that's okay.
Yeah.
But clearly Picard is disgusted. He like pushes it back away from himself. And I think it's supposed to say, no, they are choosing to eat this because they are they are alien themselves. They've been taken over by these creatures.
I have a brief story about this scene.
Oh, please.
When I was in second year university, I lived with some people, someone who had a television. So I was in the living room watching this, and
yeah, because not everyone had one.
Yeah, we did not have TVs, and we couldn't always watch it on our computers. There was no Netflix back then. So
oh my God.
I was sitting in the living room watching this, and Matt, you will know what my place was like because you lived in a similar place in residence, but it was, the living room and the kitchen were like one big room.
Yes.
And so I was watching it, and one of my housemates and her boyfriend at the time were like making a meal or something, and she was getting so annoyed at me that I wasn't changing the channel while
because of the gross worms.
Because they're eating worms, and she's like, do we have to watch this right now? And I'm like, it's Star Trek. We have to watch it whenever we catch it on TV.
Yes.
Can't watch it on demand. So, because remember the DVDs were so expensive?
They were, yeah. There was like $100 a season or something.
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
It was kind of outlandishly expensive. So Riker enters.
Yeah, well, Picard tries to back away first. He like gets up and like walks, and he does not turn his back on them. He faces them and walks to the door.
Oh yeah. Oh, I didn't notice that. Good point. Yeah, they say don't turn your back.
Yeah.
But then when the door opens, Riker's standing behind him, also menacingly.
Yeah.
And then says, "You're not going anywhere." And like puts his hand right on Picard and like stops him from leaving. And now you're like, "Oh no, Riker has been compromised."
Yeah. And then Admiral Aaron like looks at Riker and he says, "You were meant for the Doctor," which I think was like a nice kind of callback to the you got to get the cat, you got to get the doctor so that they won't they'll cover for anyone who's acting weird. And then he checks and looks and sees that there is a little tail sticking out of Riker's neck. And then Captain Scott, Twyla Scott from the beginning, she enters. Basically,
she's also taken over.
Yeah, so the meeting at Ditalix B was a setup. So rather than going and chasing after the Enterprise, they got the Enterprise to come to Earth so that they would be able to infect the Doctor. And
is that what happened? I wasn't sure after that. Like when Twyla Scott walks in, I didn't know if when she shows up at the beginning meeting in Ditalix B, has she already been taken over then?
That was my impression because one of the admirals, I forget which one of them says something about like, see how clever we are. We didn't want to chase after you. That. We got you to come to us. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. See, I was thinking like, yes, but then when they find the little gills sticking out of everyone's neck, and given how there's like none of the uniforms have collars,
I
was like, how?
How did no one notice this before?
How did no one notice this? Yeah, everyone walking around with the things sticking out of their necks. It's not very covert.
I also think it was sort of set up at the beginning to make us not trust Captain Ricks, because he was the one who came out with the phaser, and he was like, "Watch your back, Picard.
Watch your back." Yep.
So it's like, oh no, it wasn't him. It was the human captain.
All this time.
Yeah.
They have a plan that they're going to be the brain and the people are going to be the brawn. But when Picard gets his parasite, these things will also be in control of the Enterprise. So they're on their own. They're just these tiny little helpless crustaceans. But now they have all this power because they're controlling the seat of power.
Yeah.
This is the test now of what's going to happen with Riker, because Riker, they give him a bowl of these worms and he kind of is like kneading them with his hands, and then he reaches up to go put them into his mouth, and then as he reaches toward his mouth, his other hand grabs a phaser and goes and he shoots across the table.
Yeah.
And he shoots this like random yellow shirt guy.
Yeah.
And then Scott.
And then and Picard gets a phaser from Twyla Scott, and Riker shoots her, and then the parasite like crawls out of her mouth. It's really unpleasant to watch.
Yeah, they kind of open her mouth, and then the computer generated CG thing crawls out of their face.
Yeah.
Aaron escapes. Savar tries to give a Vulcan nerve pinch to Riker.
Yeah.
And then Picard saves him, so he shoots him as he's like trying to go down. And then they chase Aaron down the hallway, and they shoot him, and a parasite crawls out of him as well. They both shoot him in the back at like the same time. Yeah. It's dramatic.
And then the parasite kind of crawls, and they follow it to a room where Remick is like doing something at it. You don't know what it is, but it's clearly like not good.
You can hear a noise too. You hear like a dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee, and there's a map of the galaxy in front of him. And you don't really know anything else besides that.
Yeah. And so the parasite, using the amazing 1980s CGI, crawls to like Remick, crawls up his arm, up his body, and into his mouth.
It's gross.
It's so
super
gross. And it's bad CGI and gross. And then like his neck keeps bulging out as he's
That was cool.
talking.
That was a cool
Yeah.
effect. I was trying to figure out how they were doing that. I'm like, how do they make his neck bulge out like that?
Yeah. So, okay, my belief is that when Remick and Quinn were aboard the Enterprise before, that Remick was Remick, that he was not.
I agree with you.
Because his behavior was so different then. But yeah, okay.
And I think they try to throw us off with Remick because you never imagine Remick being in control of anything.
No.
But now they shoot him.
Yeah.
His head, it's like the flesh melts. It's like uncharacteristically graphic and visceral for Star Trek.
See the skeleton head.
Yeah, it's like the flesh like melts off of his face and his explodes.
Yeah.
And then this giant parasite thing, which is a puppet, I think, but basically like melts its way out of his chest and is screaming at them.
Yeah.
And you think, well, it turns out Remick is like the chief crustacean being thing.
It's not one of the little crustaceans. It's like,
No.
It's kind of like an Alien, I think, when the movie Alien.
Yeah, with like the chest
it's a
bursters
similar
and stuff, yeah.
When did that movie come out, before this or after this?
Oh yeah, way before.
Okay, yeah. So
yeah,
it's derivative
like 10
of that.
years. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And they shoot it.
But before they did that, like Remick was saying, "Oh, we want a peaceful coexistence."
But he says it in a very menacing way. He's like, "We only want peaceful coexistence," and you're like, "I don't believe you based on your tone."
Peace as in like submission. Yeah. Then back on the ship, Picard makes a log saying that Quinn is expected to make a full recovery, and they don't know how many parasites there were, but it looks like these little crustaceans don't survive without the mother creature, which was the one in Remick. So
yeah,
that's good. Riker says it was Crusher's idea to make it look like he was infected with the parasite. And Picard is like, yeah, no, that worked. I definitely believe that you were.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing Picard was unarmed, I guess. He might have shot Riker.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, it's a good thing he didn't have a phaser at all.
Yeah.
And Data thinks that Remick, and this is the ominous ending of the episode, was aiming a signal at an unexplored sector of the galaxy, possibly a homing beacon. And you hear that sound again, that signal, and it's like trailing off into space.
Wouldn't that be a great ending to season 1?
Yeah, I would. I mean, it's certainly a lot more of a cliffhanger-esque and adventurous. Maybe I wonder if it was supposed to be.
Yeah,
because the next episode seems so out of place as a finale. But
we got one more episode before this season ends, and this would have been a great season finale. Although, well, nothing really comes of it, I don't think.
Yeah, because plot twist, the homing signal doesn't do anything.
Yeah, we never spoil. Yeah, it's a bit of a spoiler,
spoilers.
But it's a non-spoiler because nothing happens.
So would the signal be going to like the aliens that are also in control of other things? Because on their own they can't like go anywhere. Like if they get the signal, they're like, we're just tiny little bugs. What do you want us to do?
Well, they managed to get to Earth somehow.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is a little like there is a kind of creepy ending where when Data says it could have been a homing beacon and everyone is like, I beg your pardon. And like kind of considers the implications of, my idea was that Remick was alerting the homeworld of these creatures to the existence of Earth. So basically being like, this is where you should come. So it could be, last time it was just one, but maybe there will be more mother creatures next time.
Plot twist, their homeworld is actually Pacifica. And that's why they didn't want them going there the whole time.
Yeah.
They're crustaceans from the oceans of Pacifica.
Yeah, we just want to swim. Leave us alone.
Leave us alone.
I don't know. I kind of like this episode. I think it's a bit gross and parts of it are a bit obvious, but it's fun.
Yeah, it's fun. It's like the creatures, for being as covert and taking over so subvertly the entire like Starfleet, at the end don't seem very good about being covert.
No.
Like even Remick just kind of standing there and giving away the whole plot and then letting himself get shot. Like it doesn't really make any sense.
I like that it connects to a previous episode. And I've mentioned this before, but I think there are more arcs in TNG than I am currently aware of because I've never watched it in order. So I kind of like that it's a bit of an arc. It kind of ends here, but yeah, I do like the callback to to Quinn and Remick, and that we even get the same characters, because like it would have been really easy to be like, oh, remember when Admiral Quinn said this, but we never see them again. But I was like, oh, Remick, oh yeah, I am, he's in this one.
I thought it was funny that they don't make any attempt for diplomatic anything with this species. Like when that thing comes out of Remick's body, like right, you see Riker looked at Picard for 1 second to be like, how are we gonna, and Picard's just like, no, just shoots it, and then Riker's like, okay, I'm shooting too.
Well, and that's funny because it's part of the log that Picard makes, where he's like, it's sad when our whole purpose is to seek out new life, and then we found some and destroyed it.
We blew it up.
So he's sad about it, but in the moment he was like, well, this is what we're doing.
I mean, they were parasitic beings trying to take over. That's what you're gonna do.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, that was fun.
It was. And to all of you, thank you so much for listening to this episode of With the First Link. If you liked what you heard, please feel free to leave us a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast provider of choice.
Our cover art was created by Nathan Nunn, and you can find more of his work at nathannunn.ca. Our theme song is An Amazing Adventure by Flame Lion Studio. You can follow us on Instagram at FirstLinkPod, or you can send us an email at firstlinkpod@gmail.com, and maybe tell us how you battle conspiracy theories in your life. I'm Ruthie.
And I'm Matthew, and hey, take your vitamins.